My name's Ari. I'm a SharePoint technical lead. I've been using SharePoint for over 7 years now. My details are on the slide here. I've got a SharePoint focused blog, and I'm also on Twitter if you want to connect, and I'll make all the slides available on my blog after the session. Today we're going to be talking about a project that was to build a SharePoint 2010 based extranet solution for the mobile operators around the world. So organizations like Telefonica, Vodafone can connect and collaborate together. The project was based on SharePoint 2010, but as you'll see, it was heavily customized. There's a lot of enhancements to the out-of-the-box features. So we'll run through some of the key functional areas of the system. I'll show you some screenshots to show you what the system looks like. And after we've gone through each area, I'll do a bit of a how we did it section, giving you a kind of technical overview of how we actually built the functional area and the features we used. And at the end of the session, I'll wrap up with some of the lessons we learned on the project. So the system was called InfoCenter, InfoCenter 2, in fact, which replaced the old InfoCenter, which was over 10 years old. It was built for the GSM Association, which actually represents all the mobile operators of the world, as well as handset operators such as Samsung, Nokia. There's over 800 organizations that use this platform. It enables all these mobile operators and handset makers to work together to communicate. They talk to each other to do things like find roaming partners in other countries. So that allows you to take your mobile overseas and use the other organizations' mobile networks. They also collaborate on industry-wide standards. So they create documents which are used to, I guess, control how the mobile industry works. The system's a little bit like LinkedIn in that you have company pages which have information about various companies. You also have user profiles, so users have contact details in the system. Users can connect with each other, but it's also much more specialized for the mobile industry. There are a lot of extra features like the ability to store mobile network information for each organization. And we also use SharePoint's document management features quite heavily, so they can, the various people can collaborate on documents. It's a bit of a unique extranet. Typical extranets, a company might work with its partners in isolation. With this site, it's really focused on allowing the partners to work together, and GSMA's almost like a mediator or a facilitator in organising the collaboration between the various partners. And the system was built by Concentric Consulting, which is a company here in London. So when we finished writing the functional requirements for InfoCenter, there are over 400 different use cases that were created, and the use case document was over 300 pages thick. Like many sales proposals, though, the delivery team didn't know about the sales bid until a week before the process. So I spent a long weekend in the office with a colleague providing an estimate, and part of that process was to, I guess, group the system into various functional areas. Those functional areas we created that weekend are shown on the board. You can see there's quite a few, and each of those has 5 or 10 different use cases behind it. We won't go into all of them today, but the ones in bold we'll run through. And you can see the functionality is kind of split across custom.NET components, a mix of SharePoint and custom code, and SharePoint components. So we'll cover those various aspects and see how they work together. The first area we'll talk about is organizations. So these are representing the mobile operators and other organizations that use InfoCenter. Some of the information we'll look at are the contacts, the mobile networks, the roaming partners, and the compliance ratings. But first of all, I'll just talk about the home page briefly, which is the landing page of the system. Some of the key areas on the home page are updates from the site. So you can see here the document updates, so the newest documents that have been created in InfoCenter are coming through. We're using the social features of SharePoint, and the people updates are coming through here. And we've also got personalized information. So down the bottom, we've got meeting items that are relevant to the individual who's logged on, as well as tasks and links. And also colleagues, which is part of the SharePoint user profile, are shown on the right-hand side there. When you're looking for an organization, you can come up to the advanced search area. The advanced search for organization is a structured search. So you can provide filter queries such as the region or the country of the organization that you're looking for, or even the type of networks that the organization might have. So if they have a 3G network in a particular country, you can use this to find those organizations. And down the bottom in the search results, you can see here I've got a couple of organizations and I can see the networks for those. If I drill in to an organization, I get the organization landing page. You can see there's a whole bunch of metadata about the organization. We're also listing the key contacts so people can quickly find users that they need to contact for that organization. To find more detailed information about the users of that company, you can go into the contacts page, which will show a list of names, job titles, telephone numbers, even roles within the organization, and the groups that they're part of in the other tabs here. If you're a user with certain rights within the organization to manage user information, you can go through and click on the Edit button for a user, and you'll be taken to a screen where you can edit all the contact information, and you can also control the roles which the user has, and this will define the various areas of InfoCenter the user has access to. Another key piece of information that we store about an organization is the roaming partners that they are related with. This screen here is allowing me to search for a roaming partner. So if I'm a user that works for Telefonica and I want to allow my customers to take their mobile overseas, I can use this page here to perhaps find a partner in a country such as Afghanistan that holds a 3G or has a 3G network. I can then use the functionality here to create a mailing list, which will allow me to mail out potential roaming partners and start to negotiate an agreement to set up a partnership to allow you to take your mobile overseas. Another area of the organization page is the compliance dashboard. And this area is where you can see how well an operator is complying with industry standards. And the ratings are done by their roaming partners against various documents that, or standards that the GSMA has defined. So you can see down the bottom of the page here, we've got several different sections, and each roaming partner will be able to provide a rating on how their partner is performing against different standards. So how well they're doing in terms of fraud prevention, or how well they're doing in terms of paying their bills or the quality of service on their network. So this information can be used when organizations are finding potential roaming partners to select the operators that are in better standing than others. Now, all this information could have been stored in SharePoint lists, but the nature of the information is highly relational, and storing it in a SharePoint list would mean it's very hard to query in terms of like the advanced search, where you can select a region and find all the operators that have presence in countries within that region. Also, there's a large amount of data for some of these entities, such as roaming partners, where we have more than 20,000 different roaming partner entities, and this kind of pushes the boundaries of SharePoint lists. So for that reason, we're not using SharePoint as a data store, we're using a SQL database. This allows us to provide many different views of this information in a much more performant manner than we could with SharePoint lists. And the way we maintain that data is using custom .NET forms that are stored inside SharePoint. So we basically have a SharePoint page which has a custom web form inside of it. This allowed us to kind of split the development team into two, so we could have one team focused on the custom ASP.NET components and another team focused on SharePoint. This was good because the SharePoint resources were quite hard to find, so developers were able to work on part of the system without having to know anything about SharePoint. There were some issues with this. Some of the latest development techniques, such as MVC, don't work particularly well inside SharePoint, so it was a little bit harder finding developers who would want to work on this project. But using ASP.NET development gives you a lot of benefits, such as testability. It's much easier to write unit tests on standard .NET code than code running inside SharePoint. And it also meant we could create different views of this information quite easily for an API which is used to provide data to external systems. Another functional area of InfoCenter is group functionality. This is a little bit like LinkedIn, where you can have interest groups, but inside InfoCenter these relate to topics or interests such as fraud or roaming. Users can request to join any group inside InfoCenter. This would then be approved by one of the group coordinators. If the user is allowed access, they then get to view restricted area inside the group, and so they can see information such as documents and discussion boards where they can discuss related topics. Groups also hold meetings that members can register for, and in the meetings they talk about the standards documents and I guess which new standards they're going to create and put forward. Another feature of the groups that they have an email distribution list. Because this is many different organizations, they don't have Active Directory distribution lists. So we're creating email distribution lists that these users can use to communicate with each other inside a group. So to show you how this works, if you click Groups and Projects on the top level navigation, you'll be taken to the Groups and Projects homepage. You can see down the left here, we have a hierarchical view of all the groups inside InfoCenter. And on the right-hand side, we've had a list of all the groups that you're a member of, so you have easy access to those. And if you are to drill into a group, come to the group landing page. This gives you a bit of a description about the group and what it's about. And you can see down the bottom here we've got documents that have been released by the group. So these are the most recently published standards for this group. You also have key contact information, tasks for the individual who's logged in. So this might be to approve a certain document, and calendar showing the meetings that are upcoming for the group. If we drill into calendar, you can see we're using the SharePoint calendar functionality, but when you go into an individual meeting, you can see it's a bit different from a standard meeting inside SharePoint. While we show some metadata about the meeting, we also show much richer information. Firstly, we have sessions that are going to be held at the meeting, and down the bottom we have documents that are going to be reviewed at the meeting. So users can download a bunch of potential standards documents and read those before the meeting, and these documents will be then discussed at the meeting, and users may have a chance to vote to, I guess, elect whether these documents are going to become binding standards that all the organisations are going to have to comply with. You also see on the top right, you have the ability to register for a meeting. When you register, you'll be presented with a set of questions, such as your dietary requirements, and also the sessions that you'd like to attend for the meeting. So again, there's a lot of structured information that supplements this core meeting functionality. You also have a list of meeting attendees, and these are users who have registered and been approved by the meeting coordinator. And also the email distribution list functionality is based on allowing incoming email for a discussion board inside SharePoint. So you can see here we have a discussion board, and it has an email address that users can use to send an email. The email will then be stored inside the discussion board, but it will also be sent out to all users that are part of that group. So users have a way to communicate easily over email. They might be discussing certain topics, or when to hold a meeting, or other group-related interests. And this will be sent out via email. Users won't necessarily have to log on to the system, which was a key requirement, because this isn't something that everyone will necessarily be able to use day to day. It also means you can jump on your mobile, perhaps, and send a quick reply rather than having to log on to the system. So a bit about how we built the group functionality. Each group is a SharePoint site. Has core SharePoint functionality such as document libraries, discussions, and calendars. For meetings, though, while we're using a calendar item to store core details about the event, we also store the structured information such as the meeting attendees, the registration questions, the sessions, and the documents in the SQL database, because this is relational data that doesn't fit inside SharePoint particularly well. And to link the two together, we basically have a custom display form. So when we load up that meeting form with the information, we're using a custom ASP.NET control that will then go to the database and pull that relational data back. And to allow the email distribution lists to work, again, we have information that's stored in a SQL database that when a group is created, we create a discussion board, and we're able to programmatically work out all the members of that group. And we hook into the process that SharePoint provides when it's writing into the discussion board. So when you send an email, there's an event that's triggered inside SharePoint that we can hook into to then send an email out to all the users in that group. So we're kind of enhancing the out-of-the-box incoming email functionality inside SharePoint. But we also utilize that so members who maybe join the group later can go back and have a look at previous discussions that were created inside the group. Another key area inside Info Center is the document functionality. Documents can either be official documents or non-official documents, and the official documents are typically standards for the mobile industry. So these could be things such as the charging principles, so the way that roaming partners will charge each other for use on another user's network. Because they're standards, they're very important. Modifications to these documents have a very formal approval process. This is typically a multi-stage process where you might get approval from maybe the group coordinator, but then you might get approval from all the members within the group, and it may also need to go through other groups which kind of govern the overall document process within inside Info Center. Another key area of customization is that documents had to be secured using metadata. So the permissions of the document were based on values that the user enters as they fill in the metadata form for the document. So for example, if they set the classification field to confidential full members only, that would need to secure the document so only a certain type of organisation user could see that. So organisations such as Vodafone are full members, but handset operators such as Nokia are not full members, so they would not be able to see that document. So to have a look at all the official documents, you click on the Official Documents tab in the top level navigation. It takes you to this page here where you can see there's information about the groups and the names of each official document, including the document number and the version of that particular document. Users can then use the filters down the left-hand side of the page to narrow down the list of, there's 540 documents there, or use the sort filter to find the document that they're after. When you go into an official document, you're presented with a document landing page. You don't open that document in Word automatically. You have this kind of intermediary page where you can see metadata about the document. You have the option to download the Word or PDF files, but you also have contextual information about this document, such as, in the case of an official document, the active change requests, the changes that are in progress for this document. And you can see the status of each of those. You also have a list of the published change requests. These are change requests that have already been approved. And you also have other editions of this official document. And one way of thinking about other editions is a little bit like how you have the HTML standard. You have version 4, but you also have version 5. And some people might build a web page to comply with version 4, but you can also have people who comply with version 5. It's a similar way here with these official documents. You have different versions of official standards that different operators might comply with. So we can't use the standard version history inside SharePoint because these standards are evolving at the same time. So we're storing these as separate documents inside the system. And so you can see on the right we have future and past versions of this TD36 document. The change requests. The change requests are separate documents themselves that contain the sections that are going to be changed from the official document, but that is copied manually into the official document. There's no word merge type functionality inside the system. So just going one step further, if we go into a change request document, this again has a landing page rather than going straight to the open Word document with metadata. But for a change request, we're showing the status history, and this is the status of various workflows and processes that have run on the document. So you can see here, if we zoom in a bit, it's showing you that the change request approval process has started on this document. People have been assigned tasks, those tasks have been approved, and the initial change request is now complete. And so over time, you'll get quite a long history, but be able to track which process this document has gone through to get to the state it's in. Some other things that we're showing on the change request page is information panel that allows the user who's managing this process to know what the next stage in the process might be, so they can follow that through based on how GSMA have defined the workflows must work. And if the user viewing the page has contribute rights or edit rights on the document, excuse me, they're able to see the various workflows that are available to them. So, for example, they can submit it for a reviewer approval by an individual, by group approval. In the case of a group approval, this sometimes means the document will be discussed at an upcoming meeting, and all the members of the group may have a chance to vote on whether that change request is implemented or not. And based on the results of this vote, the change will either be implemented or not. And there are other types of workflow that are sometimes required, such as approval by the legal team or approval by some of the governing groups inside InfoCenter. One other, I guess, customization we made is that we allowed the metadata that are stored against the document to be automatically populated inside the Word document when a new change request or official document is created. So users do not have to enter the title, the version, the date, or the security classification inside the document. that's captured when the user creates their document initially, and using Word quick parts, that document is automatically synced between Word and SharePoint. So if a user changes that metadata inside SharePoint, the Word document will be updated to reflect those metadata changes. They don't need to maintain that in two places. So a bit about how documents was implemented technically. The first screen you saw with a list of all official documents initially was built using the content query web part, or the I guess techniques that are used to aggregate documents on the fly inside a site collection, such as the SP site data query. We found that with the large number of documents, document libraries and groups, this exceeded the limits of the content query web part and the other tools that you might use. So we use search to provide that view of documents across the system, and search is much more scalable. You don't run into limits such as the number of document libraries that it's looking at, and it's much quicker. To build the workflows, we used custom Visual Studio workflows to build the change request approval process. And to allow metadata-based security to be implemented, we investigated using folders, because folders would mean that we'd only need to apply permission to maybe 5 or 6 different folders. But the problem with using folders is that users can change the metadata at any time, and we would then need to move the document to a different physical location, which would break links within the system. So the scenario that the method we used to implement that is to use an event handler which captures or makes changes to the document each time it's updated, and that will change the groups or the claims that are applied to that document to apply permission that way. And there are Microsoft recommendations around that. That's supported up to 50,000 documents per library, which is much more than what we had there. So when we did performance testing on that worked quite well. The other customization we made is, as I mentioned, to create like a document landing page, and that uses the document set functionality. So just to show you how that works, here's a out-of-the-box document set. You have metadata about the document and a list of documents within that document set. We're basically taking that concept, applying some branding obviously, but we still have the metadata here in the middle. We have a list of documents down the right-hand side. However, we also have a lot of other web parts on this page, such as the status history, the actions, and the information pane. So these are basically just web parts on a document set page to show contextual information about these official documents and change requests. Another area I'll talk about is reporting. The GSMA is funded by member organisations. It basically exists because they pay their membership fees. The InfoCenter 2 platform is a key benefit for joining the GSMA Association. So reports were critical because GSMA need a way to prove to these member organisations that the InfoCenter is being used and providing value, so that they'll keep renewing their membership, and I guess the GSMA will keep surviving. So it's really important to know how each organisation was using InfoCenter to be able to convince them to continue to be part of the GSM Association. Here's one report that we create. It's the member engagement report for a specific organisation. And you can see we're listing all the users who are part of that organisation. For each of them, we can show the groups that they're a part of and that they're probably active within. We also show information about how many documents downloaded, the meetings attended, the votes that they've been part of, and all this helps convince Vodafone that InfoCenter 2 is adding benefit to their organisation and keep them on as a member of the GSM Association. The other way we show data is using a tool called Tableau. And Tableau is, I guess, a data visualization tool that allows you to, I guess, navigate large data sets on the fly. So you can do things like have a look at all the usage information that we store in InfoCenter, start to filter that down by logins or requests over a certain time frame. It shows you a visual view of where those requests are coming from. You can chart it by various regions or, for example, by membership type to see kind of an overview of how the system is being used and kind of drill into key areas that you're interested in. And so a bit about how we implemented that technically. We looked at using the out-of-the-box analytic tools, but we found it was very difficult to supplement those with the data that we needed to generate these reports. So for example, the out-of-the-box analytics reports at the user level, but we couldn't add in extra information such as the organization or the region that these requests were coming from. So the way we capture this information is we hook into the usage processing pipeline that SharePoint has for processing usage data, and we capture each usage event and write that off to a separate reporting database that we use to generate these reports. We're using SQL Server reporting services to provide on-demand reports, so users can go in and run that membership engagement report for any organization, for any date range, and the data will be largely up to date. For the more detailed reports, as I mentioned, we use Tableau, which basically runs on an extract of data from that custom database that contains the usage data we've captured from SharePoint. We also spent a little bit of time thinking about how we provide training and help for this system. The system's used by over 20,000 users in 220 different countries, so there's some obvious challenges around training people. We certainly couldn't do face-to-face training for all these users. So the way training was delivered was that the GSMA staff, some of the kind of key members of the system who may be responsible for the document workflows, were trained in person, but the rest of the users were I guess, given self-service training. So we created videos for some of the key functional areas and the different roles within InfoCenter. We also created pages that would show help for example, the group page. When you're on the group page, you can click help for this page, and it will show you contextual information about how to use that page you're looking at. Another thing we did was to run usability labs. So we'd set up sessions with end users of the system, so members maybe from Vodafone or other these organizations around the world. We'd ask them to perform certain tasks, see which things worked and which didn't, and make changes to the system before it went live to make the system as intuitive as possible. So I guess reduce the level of training that was required for people to be able to pick up the system and use it efficiently. So having a look at the help section of the site, you can see there's various content we created. This is all using out-of-the-box SharePoint functionality. So we have discussion boards and FAQs, which are items in a SharePoint list. If we go into the video page, you can see we have a getting started video, which gives you a basic overall run-through of the system. We also have specific how-to items on things like creating a change request, enhancing your profile page. So this will walk the user through in an interactive way how to go through and perform these key actions inside InfoCenter. Another way that we customize the system for help was here, this button, help for this page. And for all the key areas of the system, we have this button show up. And when you click on the button, so in this example, we're looking at the group page, you'll get a pop-up window which will show a screenshot of the page and a breakdown of each area and what it means and how to use that page. So users can, I guess, look for help or self-service help on the page that they're looking at. So a bit about the launch. It took us about 9 months to build the system. So it's quite rewarding at the end of the build phase to come into the office on launch day. The project manager brought in breakfast. We had a big computer screen dashboard with Google Live Analytics. And as the activation emails went out, it was quite interesting to watch various countries light up as people started logging on and using InfoSetter for the first time. And on day one, over 3,000 users activated their account. We also had positive feedback from the various organisations that were part of InfoCenter, it being a vast improvement on the previous system. Some of the things that I guess we learned, some of the key takeaways I've taken away from the project. The content query web part or the site data query object don't really scale well when you're building sites with hundreds of different subsites all containing documents. So this is not a technique to use to aggregate information from large sites. Search is much more powerful and designed to perform well for aggregating information across large sites. We also found Workflow Foundation had some kind of fundamental problems when you're using a large number of tasks inside a workflow. So one of the change request workflows is approval by a group. Now some of these groups have up to 1,500 members. So when you're seeking approval from each of those users, groups of 10 or 20 work fine assigning out tasks to all group members, but when you're running this at scale, the workflow simply breaks down. And we found that what it was trying to do is create an XML document that represents every single task and saving that into a single column inside SQL. And that was just falling over. So we needed to rewrite that process to use I guess a custom form to capture the approval information about the document. The workflow basically has a delay, and at the end of the delay, it checks the database and the approval tasks that have been created by the users to work out whether that document's been approved. But yeah, using Workflow Foundation for more than 100 or so concurrent tasks is best avoided. We also found performance problems with some of the group pages using out-of-the-box the XSLT list view. So these are like views of the documents, the tasks, the meetings within that group site. With lots of these XSLT list views on the group pages, the page load time was resulting in loads of more than 5 seconds. So across some of those key pages, we rewrote all those controls to use AJAX requests. So the page loads quickly, and various items within that page will make subsequent requests to the server to get the information, resulting in a much more responsive page load time for the user. And because you're only sending small bits of data to and from SharePoint, the overall performance reduced down to a second or so. We also were migrating from an old system. It was Oracle based, and the files were stored on the file system. Although there wasn't massive amounts of data, I think there was maybe 50 gigs of documents, there was a large amount of structured data, such as the organizations, the roaming partners, to migrate. And that basically involved 2 people from Concentra and 2 people from the GSMA for several months building tools to migrate that data. So be careful not to underestimate the time data migration takes. So that's all I have prepared. Are there any questions